Government Business, Affaires du gouvernement. Bill, second reading. Projet de loi, deuxième lecture. Bill C-45.
Senator Harder.
Honorable Senator, je suis...
Honorable Senators, it's with pleasure that I stand today to add to the debate on Bill C-45. This bill intends to address a major health issue by legalizing and regulating cannabis in Canada. Moreover, C-45 proposes to rigorously restrict access to cannabis. To begin with, I would like to thank the senators who have already spoken to this issue so far. Their analysis will surely contribute to the committee's approach to this study on this important legislative measure addressing health and public security. I know that this study will be carried out in depth and will focus on Canada's future.
Dean for his dedicated and innovative approach as sponsor of Bill C-45 and for his eloquent and informative remarks commencing second reading in late November of last year. As Senator Dean told us, cannabis prohibition has not deterred a significant number of Canadians from consuming cannabis, especially young Canadians who face a greater risk of harms when cannabis is used frequently and intensively. It has resulted in the criminalization of tens of thousands of Canadians for simple possession. It has funded a vast illegal market with no safety or product quality standards, and it has provided billions in profits to criminals and organized crime. Most importantly, cannabis prohibition has led directly to the situation we face today, where Canadian youth are using cannabis at rates that are amongst the highest in the world. In response to high rates of youth consumption in Canada, Bill C-45 proposes a remedy, a new approach of strict cannabis control and public education to address the health and safety problems that exist in Canada right now, and to take the market out of the hands of organized crime. Dans mon intervention d'aujourd'hui,
Today, I can merely add something to the excellent observations of Senator Dean on the principles underlying the Cannabis Act, on how urgent it is to address this issue for the betterment of public health. But as a matter of transparency toward the public and for the Senate, I will address three important aspects of the Senate's study of Bill C-45.
to share some information regarding the government's consultations with Indigenous partners with respect to legalization, as I know many senators have a good deal of interest on this important matter. Second, flowing from the input and advice of many senators, I will propose a potential structure for a collaborative study of C-45 that would leverage the expertise of 3 Senate committees. And third, I will share my view regarding the potential timing of a vote on second reading and the commencement of committee proceedings on Bill C-45. Specifically, for reasons I will explain, I would propose that this chamber make a decision on second reading of Bill C-45 on or before Thursday, March 1st. For the public's information, this date would afford senators an additional 2 weeks of second reading debate on top of the 4 we've already had, with opportunities for all senators to contribute. The other significance of March 1st is that date falls before a planned 2-week recess in the Senate's sitting schedule. A decision on or before March 1st would enable Senate committees to use those 2 weeks' time to organize for their hearings.
Sorry, I'm just wondering whether you are speaking to the bill, the principle of the bill, or the motion of just talking about timeline. So I was a little bit confused.
Senator Harder?
Senators, as I indicated in my opening comments, I intend on speaking on the bill, as well as how the Senate is considering the legislative matter before us, and in a transparent way, speaking to how I believe we can accomplish what we've all set out to do with this legislation in a cooperative fashion. I am not speaking to any motion that I have proposed. As I indicated on the motion I gave notice of earlier, I would move that motion tomorrow. With respect to all of the other material I will be speaking to, it is to ensure in a transparent way all senators are aware of the state of play on this important bill.
Honourable Senators, as you know, generally when senators rise to speak on a matter on debate, we generally allow a fair amount of leeway when it pertains to a bill. So we'll continue. Senator Harder.
Your Honour. In discussing the upcoming Senate process openly and on the record, we can offer Canadians greater accessibility and understanding with respect to the Senate's process for C-45. We can also offer stakeholders greater transparency as to the pace of our deliberations and the likely timing of implementation. As you know, this information is of great practical and financial importance to provincial, territorial, Indigenous and municipal partners, to investors, business and the labour market, to law enforcement, regulators, and those facing the prospects of criminal records for possession, and most importantly, to all Canadians who have now been expecting implementation for several years as a result of a major policy commitment in the 2015 federal election. Pour en venir au premier sujet, je sais que l'engagement actuel du gouvernement auprès des partenaires autochtones au sujet des répercussions de la législation du cannabis dans leur collectivité suscite un vif intérêt chez les sénateurs. Le gouvernement s'en réjouit et, puisque le Sénat estime qu'il s'agit d'un aspect important du processus de légalisation, je tiens à fournir certaines précisions qui pourraient être utiles.
Okay. We appear to be having a problem with the translation.
You'll have to read it twice in both languages. It is double as
Would you, let me continue then. I can indicate the government has pursued extensive outreach and engagement with Indigenous experts, representative organizations, governments, youth and elders to ensure the specific needs and interests of Indigenous communities are carefully considered throughout the legislative process of Bill C-45 and the consequent implementation process. Looking as far back as the early engagement undertaken by the task force, Indigenous representatives from across the country participated in a variety of engagement activities, including via expert roundtables, bilateral meetings, and an Indigenous Peoples Roundtable. This engagement provided the task force with valuable information and perspectives and a better understanding of the early interests of First Nations, Inuit, Métis partners as the foundation for the task force advice to government. Following the work of the task force, the government has continued to engage Indigenous governments and organizations at the most senior levels. I can indicate to senators that federal, provincial, and territorial ministers of health met with Indigenous leaders to discuss cannabis as part of the Health Ministers' meeting in Edmonton in October of last year, and the Minister of Health has personally reached out to the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit Tapira Kalatami, and Métis National Council representatives to seek their active participation in public consultations on the proposed regulatory approach. Federal officials continue to meet regularly and engage through bilateral meetings with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis representatives, as well as through broader engagement meetings with Indigenous organizations and communities. In fact, over the past several months alone, federal officials have attended and presented at nearly 30 meetings with Indigenous communities and organizations throughout Canada. As you will recall, I shared the details of many of such meetings with senators in November prior to second reading of Bill C-45. And I would perhaps be of particular interest to Senator Patterson. On January 31st, the Minister of Health met with the Honourable Pat Agnikak, Inuit Minister of Health. As well, Parliamentary Secretary Blair met with Pakutut Inuit women of Canada on February 5th, and with NTI and Iqaluit Mayor Madeleine Redford on February 1st. Indigenous communities have identified public health as a top priority. In response, the the government is working with Indigenous organizations and experts to develop and deliver culturally appropriate educational and communications material, and where possible, to support Indigenous groups to lead some of these public education and engagement efforts. For example, the government is providing funding for the AFN Cannabis Task Force. In addition, the government has invested in programs relating to public and mental health in Indigenous communities, including programs that speak to the concerns raised appropriately by Senator Patterson in the context of northern communities. The government provides over $350 million each year to support the mental wellness needs of First Nations and Inuit communities. This funding supports mental wellness promotion, addictions and suicide prevention, crisis response services, treatment and aftercare, and supports for eligible former students of Indian residential schools and their families. In addition, the National Aboriginal Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy has provided funding for over a decade for diverse community-based suicide prevention projects that focused on increasing protective factors such as resilience and reducing risk factors through prevention, outreach, education, and crisis response. I anticipate senators will explore the details of this public health approach to cannabis in Indigenous communities in the potential upcoming subject matter study at the Senate Aboriginal Peoples Committee. As I have indicated to this chamber, the government welcomes such a study, and I will have more to say on this point shortly. In addition to public health, Indigenous communities also have identified public safety as a priority. Most recently, in January 2018, the government announced a federal investment of up to $291.2 million over 5 years for policing in First Nations and Inuit communities. This funding will be dedicated to communities currently served under the First Nations Policing Program. As regards economic development opportunities, as of January 25th, there were 4 existing licensed producers of cannabis and 10 current applications having self-identified as having Indigenous affiliations. Looking ahead to legalization, the government is now offering an Indigenous applicants navigator service to help guide applications through the licensing process. Upon application, a licensing professional will reach out to the applicant and be their guide through the process. Honorable Senator.
Honourable Senators, the information I have shared here today are not the only ones I could share. The government will continue to share with senators information in order to help them proceed to discuss these matters in correct depth. Last Tuesday, the Honourable Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, Minister of Health and Minister responsible for consultations with our Native partners, was here at a committee of the whole in the Senate, and she responded to questions on Bill C-45, including on the participation of Indigenous peoples in the process. I can assure you that Minister Petitpas-Taylor is very supportive of senators' interest in these matters and all aspects of the legalization of cannabis linked to public health.
The Senate's upcoming committee study of Bill C-45. Having had the benefit of input and ideas from many in this chamber, I would like to offer some thoughts on how the Senate may collaboratively and innovatively structure its upcoming C-45 committee study. The objective would be to leverage the subject matter expertise of the Aboriginal Peoples Committee on Indigenous Consultations, of the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee on the Criminal Measures in C-45, and the Social Affairs, Science and Technology Committee on the legalization framework in its entirety, and with particular attention to C-45's central focus on public health and harm reduction. I have tabled today a government motion for senators' consideration that seeks to reflect and balance the input and ideas I have received from senators. The motion proposes that, following the Senate's decision on the principle of C-45 at second reading, the Senate refer the subject matter of C-45 insofar as it relates to Indigenous persons to an Aboriginal Peoples Committee for study. The motion would also provide that committee report to the Senate by Thursday, April 19th. The intention of the motion is to formally express government support for the excellent proposal Senator Dick has already brought forward. The intention of the motion is also to suggest a timeline that would allow the Social Affairs Committee ample time to consider the findings of the Aboriginal Peoples Committee in conducting its hearings and prior to making its report on Bill C-45. For greater clarity, the April 19th date I'm suggesting would allow third reading debate of Bill C-45 to commence in early May. And I would also note that the Aboriginal Peoples Committee study will hopefully commence well in advance of C-45's potential referral to committee by an independent motion and with government support. That prospect would afford the committee over 2 months to study this subject matter until the proposed reporting date. However, since there is understandable curiosity about the potential of legalization, I will be transparent with Canadians that under this timeline of study at committee, implementation is possible this summer. And the ministers responsible for C-45 indicated to the Senate last week the actual lifting of the prohibition on cannabis would follow an 8 to 12-week regulatory period commencing after royal assent. Honourable Senators, I'll return to the content of the motion in a moment. In regards to its deliberations, I would first to note.
I'm just.
Senator Martin.
Yes, I apologize for my second interruption, but I'm just wondering, the leader just mentioned on the content of the motion. So are you referring to the bill, Senator, or to the motion that we only heard about? We haven't yet looked at the actual content of the motion. So I'm wondering if this is at second reading of the bill, and it's a very large bill. We've only had 2, 4, 6, and Senator Harder is only the 7th speaker. So I'm just trying to understand where we are going in this debate. I thought it was on second reading, not the motion that you did give notice today, Senator, which we haven't even yet debated either. So I'm rising on that point of order.
Senator Harder.
With respect, Your Honour, I think this is the same point of order, and out of transparency for all senators, I think it's important for all senators to have a perspective from the government on how we might proceed with the consideration of this important matter. I will return to the content.
Yeah, should we not do that on the...
Senator Martin.
Well, on that point, should we not do that on the actual motion that we have been given notice of, not at this time at second reading? Exactly. I thought we're looking at the principle of the bill itself, and we would be very much interested in hearing what the leader has to say, not on the content of the motion, which we will be getting to tomorrow.
Senator Harder.
With respect, Your Honour, I will continue with my presentation.
Did you want to speak, Senator Katcha?
Our House Leader said what I was going to say, so no problem.
Normally, we do not debate a motion until after it's been moved, but what I understood Senator Harder to be saying, and what I understood from listening to him, was that he wasn't getting into the nuts and bolts of the motion itself, but talking about how he wanted to proceed with the debate on C-45. So we will give you some leeway there, Senator Harder, but Senator Martin raises a good point in that we're not debating the motion. Senator Harder.
Thank you, Your Honour. I would urge this chamber to factor the approximate timetable that I referenced into consideration in our deliberations on second reading, as many stakeholders involved in the cannabis legislation will reasonably want to prepare for implementation in an organized and deliberate fashion. For example, the Senate may consider that important investments have been made in critical areas to allow for an orderly and responsible transition, including $161 million to train and equip law enforcement to detect and deter drug-impaired driving, an initial investment of $46 million to increase public education and awareness on drug-impaired driving and health risks, particularly young people, $526 million to implement and enforce the federal framework, and the government has invested $1.4 million in 14 research projects across the country to assist the impacts of legalizing and regulating cannabis in Canada. As well, in December 2017, the federal government reached an important agreement with provincial and territorial counterparts to coordinate a cannabis tax framework. The agreement is designed to keep prices low enough to put criminals out of business while offsetting the costs of public education, administration, and enforcement. The motion I table today provides the reference to subject matter of Parts 1, 2, 8, 9, and 14 of Bill C-45 to Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee for study, given the committee's expertise in criminal law. Again, for background, Part 1 sets out the main criminal prohibitions, obligations, and offenses relating to cannabis going forward. Part 2, and we've debated this in the context of second reading, provides for a ticketing scheme for certain offenses under the Cannabis Act. Part 8 deals with search warrants to allow police officers to conduct cannabis-related searches and seizures. Part 9 sets out requirements for the control and management of cannabis, chemicals, and other property seized, found, or otherwise acquired. Part 14 introduces changes to the Criminal Code to align references to provisions to the Cannabis Act. With respect to the Legal Committee's subject matter study, the motion is also proposing a reporting date of April 19th. For the public information, these subject matter studies at the Aboriginal and Legal Affairs Committee would replicate the approach this chamber has generally taken to budget legislation, albeit in pre-study, of referring parts of major bills to different committees to leverage particular expertise and provide thorough scrutiny. So this motion, though these studies would occur contemporaneously and not in pre-study, has precedent in this chamber and is in keeping with the Senate's best traditions of policy focus and collaboration. Under the motion, these two reports would come back to the Senate and will be taken into account by the Social Affairs Committee in conducting its more comprehensive study of C-45 in its entirety and through a public health lens and in conducting clause-by-clause review. The Social Affairs Committee would not be bound by a deadline, but as with the Legal and Aboriginal committees, I would anticipate senators of all three committees would stay in constructive communication regarding their respective timelines going forward, and as they would no doubt share ongoing findings and perhaps attend each other's hearings. As I said, I have placed this motion on notice paper today, and debate will continue tomorrow and commence tomorrow with a decision, I hope, following soon. Now I turn to the question of timing for a vote on C-45 at second reading, so that in-depth committee proceedings can commence. As I indicated today, I am proposing that this vote take place on or before Tuesday, March 1st, prior to the Senate's planned two-week recess, so that committees can use that time to schedule witnesses and hearings. In suggesting this date for a vote, I would briefly review the Senate process that has occurred to date and why I think an additional two-week setting.
Senator Harder, Senator Martin raised a point already with respect to debate on the motion. Discussion on the timelines and your discussion with respect to its relation to the bill are fine, but if you get into debate on the actual motion, you're crossing that line that we said cannot be crossed in debate. So I just caution you not to do that, please. Senator Harder.
I will ensure that I'm reflecting on the conduct of second reading. And as you know, honorable colleagues, second reading commenced on November 30th of last year. To date, and with the benefit of winter break to prepare, senators have had 4 sitting weeks of second reading debate on Bill C-45. Before the last of the 2 weeks of second reading debate I am proposing, there would be 1 additional week of recess to prepare for any final remarks. I am also very much open to sitting Fridays and Mondays prior to March 1st to afford senators additional time for debate. And of course, over the past months, this formal process of debate has also been complemented by extensive briefings organized by Senator Dean and other offices. Senator Dean has done an absolutely astounding job in terms of making resources available and being a tireless conduit of information. For example, on November 1st, Senators Dean and Boniface, who is of course the sponsor on C-46 on impaired driving, hosted a briefing for all senators with the Honourable Anne McClellan and Dr. Mark Ware, who headed the task force on cannabis legislation and regulation. On November 30th, Senator Dean hosted an information session for all senators with government officials responsible for Bill C-45. And on December 13th, Senator Dean hosted researchers from the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse, who presented all senators on nationwide youth perceptions relating to cannabis. On January 30th, Senator O organized a presentation with the pediatric chairs of Canada on the effects of cannabis on youth. On February 6th, for 2 hours on television, senators asked questions on C-45 of Ministers of Justice, Health, Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, along with the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Health. And yesterday, with an additional date of February 26th, Senator Dean has organized tours for senators of Canopy Growth, the cannabis production facility in Smiths Falls. So it is in this context of very thorough and long-running preparations that I suggest that 2 additional weeks of second reading debate are sufficient for the commencement of committee stage. However, Senators, I do frankly have some concerns that partisan politics could affect our proceedings. Let us consider the facts. I'm concerned, for example, that the leader of the National Conservative Caucus has publicly indicated a desire to delay Senate proceedings on Bill C-45. While I certainly agree with the need to take our time to do our job with sober second thought,
It's relevant to the principle.
There was a little bit of latitude as you were talking about just the work that Senator Dean and others have done, and we're looking at the substance of the bill. But Senator, Your Honor, I believe that now we're getting into another territory which I could sort of call a different point of order, but I feel like we're still on the same debate, or the Senator Harder is giving the same speech as he sort of started with, speaking actually more to the motion that he gave notice of rather than the substance of the bill itself on second reading. I mean, I could question whether the committees that he's suggesting that be study parts of the bill, maybe there are other committees that should be studying other parts of the bill. There's a lot more to debate on the motion, which we only got notice of today. So, Your Honor, I know you intervened previously, but I don't see Senator Harder making adjustments to his speech. He's still reading from the same text. So I would like to ask that perhaps, I don't know what instruction you would give or what you would say to this fourth, I think, point of order, because I don't see a difference in what Senator Harder is saying during.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Martin. As you indicated, I did caution Senator Harder about straying into debate on the motion. I think he's moved away from that. And the last thing I've been hearing is the actual debate on C-45. I have not heard him since then debate the motion. So I'm going to allow him to continue. Senator Harder.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Trying to throw you.
While I certainly agree we need to take time to do our job of sober second thought in second reading, any potential delay for the sake of delay does a disservice to Canadians and to the culture here in this chamber. So we need to be vigilant as a chamber that we are using our time wisely, and that means ensuring that there is appropriate committee consideration. My fear, quite frankly, is that March 1st would come and we may see some sort of procedural obstruction we've seen from some senators in this Parliament on multiple items of government and non-government business. Just to explain a bit more, I do not want to end up with repeated motions of adjournment with 1-hour standing bells for the apparent purpose of avoiding a timely decision at second reading, and faced with a 2-week recess and the potential loss of that time for committee preparations. I would not want to see our deliberations on a matter of such immense consequence reduced to a procedural back and forths. Honourable Senators, this chamber should treat all legislation in a fair and timely manner. Having indicated concern about a potential delay, I want to be clear that I am proceeding transparently and in good faith with all groups in the Senate. And in that spirit, I have raised with all leadership groups that I am asking for their agreement on a motion to hold a vote on or before March 1st on second reading. I am optimistic that we will reach such an agreement soon, as I think this is a reasonable approach. However, should that agreement prove beyond reach, I can indicate that I will seek this chamber's support to explore a procedural mechanism known to some as temporal apportionment and known to others as time allocation. So the government and the public understands the procedure. Under the rules of the Senate, the government leader of the Senate has the power to ask a majority of the chamber to eventually limit a stage of debate and hold a vote. When used responsibly, time allocation balances the need for debate with the competing need to move things along in a reasonable time frame for reasons of good governance. As government representative in the Senate, I have never moved time allocation. By contrast, the previous government leader in the Senate used time allocation over 20 times.
Excuse me, Senator Harder. Excuse me. Senator Stewart Olson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I was actually looking forward to your speech today because I really would like to hear the government's positioning on this bill. Perhaps the positioning of a rationale of why we're rushing it through, but I really was looking forward to your particular insights and persuasions to us as to how we should vote. I know that your speech is concentrating on your motion and on the deliberations of moving this forward quickly without answering our questions or without presenting us with firm arguments as to why this is a good piece of legislation. Your Honor, I would have preferred to talk about to hear the meat of the bill discussed rather than why we must proceed quickly and the threats of time allocation and things like that. I really wish, I would like to discuss the motion tomorrow, and I'd like to hear why you think it's imperative that we move this quickly and the direction of this bill.
Honourable Senators, the substance of the motion that was introduced today is not being discussed now. There is no time allocation motion before us. If the government representative wants to talk about Bill C-45 in terms of what he thinks is an appropriate time frame, that's quite in order. However, if there was a motion for time allocation before us, it would not be in order until we were debating that. And I continue to say that should Senator Harder stray into debate on the motion that was introduced today, it will be out of order. Senator Harder.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good job.
I would like to ensure that all senators are aware that I am prepared, albeit with reluctance, to seek this chamber's support for time allocation to send Bill C-45 to committee on or prior to March 1st. In this case, I would move a motion in the future seeking the support of a majority of this chamber along the timeline I have proposed, so that the Senate's deliberations can proceed to committee stage, where its both in-depth, sober second thought can take place. However, I very much hope that time allocation will not be necessary, but this is not up to me. I would vastly prefer to proceed by agreement. Colleagues, it is not at all surprising that a common theme has arisen through discussions on legalization in the other place, the public sphere and in the Senate, the time frame associated with implementation. Whether it is a provincial or territorial government that is today making critical decisions regarding the details and nature of their retail and distribution networks, investing in infrastructure, hiring and training staff, procuring product, all in anticipation of implementation this summer, or it is the industry that is moving to build inventories, expanding capacity, make decisions about product forms, packaging, and labels. Everyone is keenly interested in understanding the time frame associated with implementation. Many of these details will be contained in federal regulations, which, as I outlined earlier in my remarks, cannot be finalized and published officially until C-45 receives royal assent. It stands then that a sufficient period of time between royal assent and coming into force must exist to allow for the practical realities of the implementation. Put simply, a period of transition is necessary to allow for the publication of regulations and the shipment of cannabis products from federally licensed producers to provincially or territorially authorized distributors and retailers. I can share some details with senators concerning this regulatory process. Between November and January, Health Canada conducted a comprehensive consultation with Canadians regarding the design and details of the new regulatory system. Valuable feedback provided by thousands of individuals, by industry, by governments, will inform the design of the final regulations. These regulations must be published prior to coming into force of the legislation. In many cases, Health Canada is proposing to build upon the world-class system of regulations that have long been in place for current producers of cannabis for medical purposes or industrial hemp. Enacting on many of these same strict regulatory controls for production under the proposed Cannabis Act would allow for legally and quality-controlled products to be available by the summer of 2018 and immediately begin to address the public health and safety risks posed by illegally produced cannabis. We are seeing positive signs in all regions of the country that the legal, federally licensed cannabis industry is preparing, including significant capital investments in production capacity. Just as the federal government has made considerable progress readying itself for implementation, likewise, provincial and territorial governments have made considerable progress. Over the past 6 months, provincial and territorial governments have completed public consultations, introduced legislation, or announced key features of systems governing distribution, sales, and other important aspects of their forthcoming regimes. For example, Ontario has now passed legislation that will take effect July 1st, 2018. From the earliest opportunity, the Canadian Federation of Municipalities has been clear that municipalities are ready and capable partners in fulfilling this federal government commitment to Canadians. Cette période de transition est importante pour que les Canadiens obtiennent suffisamment de renseignements sur les nouvelles lois et pour que les forces de l'ordre soient informées, formées et prêtes à appliquer les règles. Il faut examiner ces considérations pour suivre les discussions et le gouvernement est résolu à participer.
Again, translation.
This period of transition is important so that Canadians will have enough information about the new laws and law enforcement officials be informed, trained, and ready to apply them. The government will continue this ongoing discussion.
To ensure appropriate and regularized, predictable implementation, and it is in that context in which we do our work, that I say I am confident that this chamber will rise to the task of reviewing this legislation in a timely manner with the view of promoting an orderly and smooth transition in the best interests of Canadians, particularly our young people, and I would urge that we reflect on how best we can ensure that second reading debate ends on or before March 1st.
Senatrice Mention, voulez-vous poser?
Senator Mention, you would like to ask a question. Yes, if Senator Harder will take my question. Yes. At the beginning of your speech, you said that the price of cannabis would be low enough in English, to offset the black market, as you put it. The price of cannabis, as it will be sold legally, will be about $10 a gram, if I'm not mistaken. On the black market, it is sold for $5 to $7 a gram. Knowing that Canadians, both young and old, are aware of this price differential, how do you think you'll be able to offset the black market if you're selling at a higher price? If we're considering price competition, I think those currently buying on the black market will continue to buy it for $5 to $7 rather than paying $10 plus taxes. So could you tell us more about this pricing?
Question is, of course, an important question that she's asking, and one that the regulators are seeking to ensure the appropriate balance. Surely one of the significant advantages of legalization is to ensure the appropriate oversight and product safety that will assure Canadians participating in the recreational market that they have the quality of control that the present medical market has benefit of. But my point in the discussion was to share with senators the considerations that are being taken, on one hand, to ensure that the price adequately provides some offset to the enforcement and the implementation costs of legalization, while at the same time is not one that will encourage the now deep-seated illegal market that is the purview of criminal elements.
Senatrice Mention.
Senator Mention. All right, another question. Who are we legalizing marijuana for? For those who are using the black market currently, or for those who aren't using the black market but want to try a quality product?
Senator Harder.
The government's view is that legalization is the appropriate public policy choice to deal with the reality of today's situation. The reality is we have a very large cannabis demand, particularly among youth. I mentioned the youth participation rates in cannabis consumption. That consumption is increasingly of quality that causes parents certainly to be concerned. At the same time, that product is in the hands of criminal elements and ought to be addressed. To address the dilemma, it's not just good enough to decriminalize, because that doesn't change the market. We actually have to change the market to ensure that we are criminalizing, or we are moving the criminalized elements out of the marketplace and putting that distribution in the hands of the choices that provinces are making with respect to distribution, and that the product itself has certain regulatory control to it, that it is a market that is responsible and meets the public health concerns. But this is also a very strong signal to youth to, in a sense, not participate in the market, particularly young youth, or to better understand the costs or potential risks to such participation. So it's a challenge that the government is facing, particularly one that has been allowed to run uncontrolled for so many years. I would remind senators that a very, I knew him as a friend, but I did not know him as a senator, Pierre-Claude Nolin had a report to the Senate many years ago which predicted the choices that the government has made. I think it's that work that should inspire us to further second reading debate.
Senator White.
For you to take a question, please. You do realize that 100% of the marijuana sold to youth in this country, if this legislation passes, will be black market marijuana? Any suggestion that it's going to be cleaner, that it's going to be controlled, is actually not true. 100% of the marijuana sold, if this bill passes as it's written today, will be black market marijuana. Do you realize that?
Senator Harder.
I would respectfully disagree.
Otherwise?
Is the government going to get, if I may, is the government going to get involved in trafficking of marijuana to people under the age of 18 as well? Because I don't know how it's not going to be black market marijuana. Black market means it's illegal. 100% will be sold illegally. It's a crime in this legislation to do so. So it's going to be black market.
Senator Harder.
Senator, you're accepting the notion that under the legislation, there are prohibitions on selling to youth of a certain age. That will, of course, continue. And in that narrow sense, the objective of the legislation is to have robust enforcement of the distribution, at the same time as ensuring that there is a robust education program so that young people are made aware of the risks, particularly those under the age of 18, in the government's view, who run greater risks because of the development of their mental faculties.
Senator White. Senator White.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Speaker. You stated that the marijuana being sold to youth would be legal, not sold through a black market. You just actually defined what a black market looks like. A black market is something sold illegally. It doesn't matter where it came from. It's not going to come from Tweed or other legal producers. They're not allowed to sell it to people under the age of 18. So it's going to come from the black market. The second piece is already Canadian youth under the age of 18 are the #1 user in the world. This legislation, and the minister stated it last week, and it was wrong then and it's wrong today, this legislation will do nothing to stop the black market trafficking of marijuana to children under the age of 18. Nothing.
Senator Harder.
I would welcome your participation in debate.
Senator Rains.
You don't look at that much for 1 month.
Speaker, will you take a question? I'm very concerned about what is being done for the education right now of young people. I see numbers bandied around $46 million for education. But I want to ask, is this happening right now? Because when I go out there and look for marketing programs to young people about the dangers of marijuana, I do not see them. And even when I went on the government's website about cannabis, there's a link, interestingly enough, to Drug-Free Kids Canada. When I click on that, on the government's website, sitting here in the Senate, it says, forbidden, you don't have permission to access. So that is a private sector, volunteer-driven organization that it appears the government is using to educate children, and yet here in the chamber, we can't access that site. So what good is that? And how are you going to advertise and promote to young people? We should have been starting, if the Prime Minister put this in his campaign platform, we should have been starting that education the minute he was elected. Right now we see a Prime Minister who is proud of the fact that marijuana is okay. That message is going down to the kids. They think it's okay. They have no idea of the harms that can be done. How is our government going to turn on that promotion now and not wait? It seems like you're waiting forever. Thank you.
Excuse me, Senator Harder, your time has expired. I know there are other senators who wish to ask a question as well. Are you asking for 5 more minutes to answer questions?
Happy to.
Leave granted, honourable senators? Agreed? Senator Harder.
Let me respond, first of all, by saying the Prime Minister has been clear from day one that the purpose of this legislation is to ensure appropriate control, appropriate regulatory framework, and appropriate programming targeting those who ought not participate in the recreational market because of their age, as to why that should not take place. The development of those materials is underway. Ministers spoke about that when they appeared here, and that they are working in particular with targeted groups. Parliamentary Secretary Blair spoke of the work that he had undertaken with Aboriginal communities to ensure that the materials that are being developed are culturally sensitive and in appropriate languages. But it would be, until the legislation has received royal assent, it would be difficult to spend and distribute large materials that provide the context for the implementation strategy that the government will be undertaking. Let's have a more fulsome debate on what further educational programs there might be contemplated, but it is very much at the heart of the government's implementation strategy to ensure that Canadians are well informed, that partnership with the provinces and the municipalities, and depending on the jurisdiction, the distribution networks are all part and parcel of ensuring appropriate regulatory framework for this product.
Senator Rain.
Senator Harder, when I look at the amount of money that there wasn't any in the last budget, I mean, I don't understand how you can say we can't spend money on educating our children on the dangers of marijuana because we haven't passed legislation to legalize it. We know that they are already succumbing to the pushers and using marijuana. So why are we waiting? Why has that not happened already? And what is in the budget, this coming budget, to attack this issue, this educational need, as much as possible? Or are we just going to leave it up to the voluntary sector to do it? It doesn't make sense to me. What is in the budget for next year?
Senator Harder.
It is not for me to indicate what the upcoming budget will contain. But I certainly encourage the honourable senator to participate in the debate.
Senator Smith.
Just a quick question. When the minister was in last week, the health minister, and I asked the question, what have you done to educate the kids, the public? She said, we've been working on discussing things for the last year. And I said, well, that's the same thing that Minister Morneau told us about the tax changes. I said, how much do you have in your budget for education? She said, $46 million. I said, have you started your educational program? She said, well, it's going to take at least 3 months to roll it out. The question is, when I asked how much have you spent to date, 0. When are you going to implement? March 1st. If it takes 3 months, if we compare to Colorado and into Washington and the state, 12 and 18 months before they allowed the rollout of the sale. So again, I just did a TV interview with CTV down in Halifax, and they said, well, the government's saying you're obstructionists. The Conservatives are obstructionists. We're not obstructionists. What we want to make sure we do is we thoroughly analyze the information. When we hear feedback from a minister who says, we are going to educate the kids, and you ask the question, have you started? She says, no. Have you spent any money? No. How much? When are you going to start? March 1st. Then that implies that the integration process is loose, and there are gaps in the integration process. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. So all we're saying is this going to be properly implemented?
Senator Harder.
Of course it's going to be properly implemented, and with respect to the position the Honourable Senator and his caucus is taking with respect to this debate, I welcome their participation. Part of their role is to actually participate in the debate, and I hope that over the coming weeks we can hear from them.
Senator Carignan.
Oui, merci, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. You quoted Senator Nolan, and of course, I have the highest respect for Senator Nolan, his 2002 report. But what we're reading today and what we observe is that at least the science is quite clear to the effect that people under 25 years of age, in particular, this is really not very good for their health. And there are many unknowns for people of any age. Senator Nolan's report, that of 2002, was tabled many years ago, 2018 right now. It seems that you're telling us that science knew more in 2002 than it does now. Can you tell us why you are referring to a 2002 report when we know that science even today doesn't know all the facts?
His question. I reference the work of Senator Nolan because it was an early opportunity where this chamber took a deep study of this important subject matter and raised public awareness and consideration of a path forward that he and his committee recommended Canada undertake. We have lost those years. In the interim, we have had a number of changes. One is the development of the medical marijuana marketplace, but we've also had the added entrenchment of criminal elements in the cannabis business, and it is this government which has come to the conclusion and has stated so in its platform and now in its legislation that we ought to legalize and heavily regulate the control and distribution of cannabis to protect our kids.
Senator Carignan.
Oui. J'ai pas le chiffre exact.
I don't have the precise figures, but do you know how many months Senator Nolan or his committee took to study the issue? And consider that, and then tell us why you would like us to restrict ourselves to 3 weeks in this notice of motion that you have promised for tomorrow.
You will know better than I how long this study of Senator Nolan took place. What I can tell you, and you will be well aware, is that this place received the bill, C-45, on the 28th of November. On the 30th day of November, second reading started with the sponsor of the bill, Senator Dean. Since November, we've had a number of speeches from independent senators' group members. We have had the first speech by a Conservative senator last Thursday, and what I am saying is that it is entirely reasonable to me that we would continue with and encourage broader debate and participation by senators this week and the week that we're back to ensure that this bill be appropriately considered for second reading, but it does advance to committee. That, of course, is in the hands of the Senate.
Senator Carignan.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. You mentioned that the aim is to produce a quality product to ensure that supply is appropriate and avoid having black market products that are of lesser quality on the market. But when a product is marketed, usually there's an ability to recall products. You know, if anyone puts a product on the market, they have to be able to recall market products. So they need to be able to identify what lots were defective or problematic in order to be able to remove them from the market. So could you tell me what sort of tracking system the government has in mind in this case that would allow it to track cannabis production from the grain, from seed to consumption, public consumption?
Tour of the Canopy facility. We have the benefit in Canada of the experience of medical marijuana and the tracking for that purpose, which is the basis on which we will proceed. Clearly, you're making a very good case for committee to appropriately study the questions that you're raising. We are now in second reading, which is the debate on the principle of the bill. And as critic of the official opposition, I would welcome your participation in the debate.
Senator Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks, Senator, for his comments today. I have concerns, as I'm sure others do, with the bill, and when you look at information coming out of Colorado, as an example, where legalization has doubled the amount of drivers involved in fatal crashes who tested positive for marijuana, and in high school, the drug violations have increased by 71%. I'm just concerned as I try to gather information here on the bill in relation to what seems to be the lack of science that's been reported out there in relation to how we deal with impaired drivers. And we all know that the fatalities and the casualties of impaired driving now as it relates to alcohol. I'm concerned how, again, stand to be corrected, when a police officer now comes up to the window of a vehicle, is going to be a visual of how he determines the person behind the wheel is impaired. We're hearing a lot of lawsuits being launched in the United States based on this visual activity. I'm just wondering, from a government point of view, how government plans to address the impaired driving situations with people that are under the influence of marijuana.
Honourable Senators, it's 3:30, and normally we would begin question period now, but I understand that Minister LeBlanc has been delayed, so as previously agreed, we will continue with the business of the House until the Minister arrives. Senator Harder?
Yes, Senator, you're raising the questions surrounding the enforcement of impaired driving, both drug and alcohol related in your question. That, of course, is the subject matter of Bill C-46, which is now before committee, and I would encourage you to participate in those committee debates where witnesses are coming forward and how the bill is strengthening the regime based on what the science is telling us and what engineering is able to accomplish in terms of providing the capacity in the enforcement community for enhanced impaired driving enforcement, both for drugs and for cannabis. This is an important companion piece to this legislation, but it's not the subject matter of C-45.
Senator Manning?
Thank you, Senator. I recently heard in the news the comments by ministers in relation to the implementation after the bill becomes law. That right now the July 1st deadline is kind of pushed out somewhat in regards to maybe 8 to 10 weeks of implementation after the fact. I'm just wondering today with the plan now, the plan that you have put forward today, including the possibility of time allocation, is a government's plan to try to have the piece of legislation passed into law earlier so that they can be implemented by July the 1st, or is that seen to be part of the plan here today?
Senator Harder.
Thank you, Senator. Let me be very clear. What I am suggesting is that we have appropriate continued second reading debate and that we have about 2 months of time allocated for committee consideration. that when the bill comes back here, we'll have to see how third reading progresses. But the view of the government, and restated last week with ministers, and let me repeat, is that the implementation of this legislation, this important initiative, will take place after royal assent. It's a process of implementation that doesn't just turn on the switch one day, but it provides a series of events that will require from 6 to 12 weeks of implementation, and that it is the objective of the government to ensure that implementation takes place in the course of the summer.
Senator Malte.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. Senator Harder, you responded to my colleagues, the Honourable Senator Carignan, on the matter of the product's quality. You know, in Canada, we have a very regulated approach to traceability and food safety. You know, you can't just tell by looking at it whether a cow is ill or not. You have to test the animal, you have to examine each single animal. And you can't just look at a field of cannabis and decide by looking at it whether it's in good health. You have to test the cannabis. Is the government at present, and given the number of permits and cannabis plants that there will be across Canada, including the 4 plants in so many apartments across the land, will be ensuring that there's a way to test this product to ensure that it will not be harmful to health, much as we do in the food and agro-food business?
In fact, the existing medical marijuana regime has exactly that kind of control and oversight to ensure appropriate vigilance in the quality of the product.
Juste pour poursuivre sur le sénateur.
So just picking up on what Senator Nolan has pointed out, has Senator Harder read the open letter of Senator Nolan on the 30th of August of 2010, published in Le Devoir, the newspaper, in which he states that we don't approve of using drugs for fun. We would prefer to live without drugs, but it's kind of like hoping for peace everywhere in the world. And then he had said that the recommended age, the committee had recommended that the legal age for consumption be no lower than 16, based on science that shows that only then is the human brain sufficiently developed to prevent it from suffering unduly from consuming cannabis. But all scientists and medical experts tell us something quite different. So once again, I'm going to ask, is the senator in agreement with my statement that science is evolving and that we really have to take great care not to quote reports that go back to 2002, when science was no wiser than it is?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. It gives me the opportunity to repeat that I was not, in referencing Senator Nolan's report, suggesting that it be the basis on which a regime of cannabis be implemented, recreational cannabis be implemented, but simply to point out that this debate in the Senate of Canada those many years ago was one of the component pieces to the public dialogue on this. The second point I'd make to the Senator is that the existing state of concern for the use of cannabis amongst our youth is obvious. We have a crisis in our hands. This bill doesn't invent the recreational use of cannabis by young people. It seeks to regulate and limit the use of cannabis by young people under a certain age. The objective of this bill is to deal with the historic reality that the government inherited and to move forward in a fashion that moves beyond simply just say no and prohibition to one that is a more modern and contemporary approach.
Senator Royale.
Would the Honourable Senator entertain another question? Thank you, Senator Harder.
My preoccupation is on the impact of the bill as one would say, the law of unintended consequence. I understand the objective, the general objective of the bill, but Senator, you have to recognize that once you legalize something that is forbidden, prohibited by law, the person could incur a criminal record affecting his or her career for the rest of his or her life, not being able to cross the border or to fly in many countries around the world. I'm sure that the government should have thought of the impact on the increase of the consumption. To me, this bill will not reduce the consumption. I was reading an article in the Army, 20% of soldiers consume cannabis. So once it's legal, one would expect an additional number in proportion will add to the consumption. So did the government make any study of the impact of the bill on the increase of the level of consumption, and especially in the youth and the group of consumers that are at risk because of, as Senator Carignan mentioned, because of the mental condition of youth that is in the process of achieving stability. So we all know that. Nobody would question that today. And it was certainly not, as you will remember, I don't know your exact age, Senator Harder, but if you were of the flower power in the 60s, everybody thought by smoking a joint, you attained nirvana and all your problem would be solved. In fact, you were creating your own problem today by that. So to me, the impact of this bill is very important to measure if the government wants to be realistic under control of the situation instead of unleashing a flow of consumers whereby the risk will be magnified.
Well, Senator, you ask about my age. Let me simply say that I might have grown up in the age of flower power, but it eluded me. I am probably unique in many respects of never seeing or smelling marijuana. I don't raise that as a point of pride on my part, just as a sign of how a little Mennonite boy in rural Canada grows up. There wasn't a lot of that available. With actually that not either. Let me, though more seriously, contribute to your comments by adding a couple of comments. One is ministers have referenced the jurisdictions where, in fact, the consumption rate has gone down with legalization. That one can't predict that that's the case that will happen in Canada. You raise quite properly the law of unintended consequences and how you take that into account. What we do know is that the existing law, the existing regime of illegal consumption of cannabis is detrimental to our youth. The consumption of marijuana is highest in our youth and is growing, that we have to intend through public policy a regime change which this law contemplates. What I can assure the Honourable Senator is that the government, with its program of enforcement, with its program of public education, will target young people in particular to understand the consequences of consumption below the legal age, and with respect to the legal age and consumption, to ensure that there is public awareness for an appropriate risk. But the other objective, of course, is to ensure that there is vigilant enforcement, which is why Bill C-46, which is before a very prominent committee of the Senate, is being a companion with this legislation to ensure better tools for our enforcement community on all drug and alcohol-related crimes, because we do have better information today.
Senator Joyal.
Harder, as you know, that there are 9 American states where there has been a legal market. Did the Department of Justice or the Health Department have gone through an analysis of the comparative figure of increase or, as you mentioned, decrease of marijuana so that we could have an objective picture of what might be the impact of the bill on the basis of the experience of others so that we had a better picture and a better reliability on the supputation on what would be the impact of this bill.
Senator Harder.
Senator, I think you're raising a very important dimension of the debate, and one that I hope in committee the senators can meet with the officials and get greater details further to the comments made by ministers in the Senate last week, so that that material is available in the Senate deliberations. Senator
Omidvar.
Thank you, Speaker, for recognizing me. I've been waiting very patiently to ask my question. I was one of the senators who went yesterday on the tour of Canopy Growth, I believe it's called, and it gave me a sense of confidence if the bill is going to pass and we're going to legalize cannabis consumption, that there are production facilities with such a high degree of sophistication, control, regulation, and security. Mr. Bruce Linton, who is the CEO of Canopy Growth, did, however, point our attention to a part of the legislation that leaves him with some concern. It's not an aspect of the legislation that has been talked about a great deal. I haven't been able to find it, but I'm sure you know about this. And this is the legislation will enable the growth of cannabis in open fields under certain circumstances for individuals and companies that have licenses. Not in greenhouses and not in controlled facilities, but in open fields. And he pointed out that his concern would be that it's an open field accessible by drones. Now, I hadn't thought about that, and that drones could fly in, and that could create another expression of criminalization. I wonder if you have a point of view on that and whether this should be looked at in committee as well.
Senator Harder.
I'll be brief because I see the minister is here. That is exactly the kind of question that I would expect appropriate for committee, to hear from those involved in the existing medical market, their experience and what concerns that might raise. We are now in the period of second reading debate, which is the agreement in principle. And I would hope that we can have broad participation over the coming days to ensure that this House has an active interest in and discussion around Bill C-45.
Honourable Senators, we will now proceed to